Interviewers of Reddit. What was the worst applicant you have ever interviewed? Had a guy crap himself because he got sick morning of the interview and was giving it his all. Helped him with on-site gym to clean up, had his wife come get him. Interviewed him a week later out of pity, and he showed up and was hired on the spot. He got my job when I left the company a few years later. Story 2. The worst one my wife's told me when she was interviewing someone for a sandwich place was 3 questions one after another that the interviewee couldn't have made themselves seem dodgier. Q. If I get hired, can I get an advance on my first month's pay? A. No, sorry. That's not something we're allowed to do. Okay. Will I be doing cash drops at night from the safe? A. No. Only supervisors have access to the safes. Will I be working on the till? Story 3. Guy comes in for an interview for an entry-level software development position. He's fresh out of college, just like we were looking for. Apart from some alarmingly bad breath, the interview itself was going just a bit below average. He seemed a little slower than other applicants, but what really killed it happened about 30 minutes into the interview, when we were interrupted by the receptionist. Apparently, someone had double-parked their Subaru Outback in 2 very clearly labeled motorcycle spots out in front of the building. These short, narrow spots are not at all long enough to hold a car, and he was literally blocking in someone's Jeep. The owner of said Jeep was trying to get to the hospital for a family emergency of some kind, and everyone in the company had been running around looking for the owner of the Outback to get them to ducking move. Of course, it was the dumbass bricks interviewee. Story 4. I was doing technical interviews. Candidate gets dropped off at my office by previous interviewer. I'm newish to the interviewing game, so my first question is kind of medium hard. He smiles nervously. I don't know. Okay, that's cool. I'd rather that than BS. I ask the next question, a bit easier. Smile. I don't know. Okay. I pull up a basic trouble ticket, explain the problem. How would you go about fixing that? I don't know. I then asked him a question which he was nominally certified to know. I don't know. At that point, I was out of questions. I had planned for a 45-minute interview, but I don't know doesn't take a long time to say and is hard to follow up on. Meanwhile, my boss messages me asking how the interview is going. I tell him not well. He shows up at my door about 20 seconds later, pulls me out into hallway, and tells me that I confirmed the last interviewer's experience. Then he took the candidate away and sent him home. Perfectly nice person, but seemingly devoid of any knowledge of computers, as far as we could tell. Story 5. Was interviewing to hire an accountant. This one guy, I don't know if it was just nerves or not, but my first question after telling him about the company role was, so tell me about your experience and which aspects you think would help you in this role. He responded, it's all in my CV. I tried to push him a bit by explaining I've read the CV, but I want to hear his take on it so I can get a feel for his communication skills, how he thinks, etc. I can't give you any more information than what's already there. I tried a few more questions, all of which were responded by picking up his CV and reading from it. Awkward. Story 6. Had an older guy in his 40s show up 10 minutes late, answer the phone after introducing himself, and proceed to yell at his mother for 15 minutes while I was standing there waiting on him to finish. Ma, I'm at work. I'll call you back. Shut up, Ma. I'll call you back, and so on. Then once he finally sits down, I realize he is hammered drunk. Face is cherry red, he is sweating, and the unmistakable smell of booze on his body odor and breath. He told me he would be a store manager one day. I just humored him since I had time to kill. Weirdest interview I've ever experienced, but also the worst is story 7. Oh, I got this one B2B sales position when I was interim sales manager. Guy comes in with colored spiked hair, wearing ripped jeans with his baby mama and his crying baby. Yes, but wait, no, it gets better. Guy arrives 30 minutes late as well. I was on the call with a customer, so I was busy and wasn't that inclined to interview someone who was late and showed up dressing unprofessional. As the guy is waiting for me, he tells the secretary he has to go cash a check and get his baby some milk. I finally come out and ask the secretary where he is. She informs me he left to go cash his check and buy his baby some milk. And I'm like, wow. I go back into my office an hour and a half later, he comes back. I'm in a meeting with the GM, he's told to wait. Keep in mind by this point, he's brought his baby with him to an interview. He's brought his girlfriend with him to the interview. He arrived 30 minutes late. He left to go buy his baby some milk and cash a check. He's now 2 hours later. He's unprofessionally dressed for a B2B sales job interview. He's unprofessional to our secretary as well, in regards to his comments and behavior, but it gets better. I come out and greet him, and the first thing he says to me, my time is valuable. I don't like waiting for you. And I'm standing there in shock. And I go, excuse me? He says, I'm here for the interview, and my time is valuable, and you're constantly too busy to talk to me. Let's get this interview over with so I can start. And I'm like, wow. So I smile and say, well, I got great news. The interview is over. We won't be moving forward with your application, he protests. I ask, did you even bring a resume? He said no. And I'm like, all right, our interview is over. Goodbye. I was amazed. My secretary said he stood there for like 5 minutes, just staring into space, wondering, It just happened to him. When his girlfriend stood up and asked the secretary, "Does that mean we aren't going to hire him?" And the secretary said, "I believe so." He left after that. Story 8. Applicant looked presentable. White French cuffed shirt. Then he entered the room. He smelled like crap. It was as if someone had been collecting the craps people take at Taco Bell and the portable bathrooms used in marathons for the past 10 years. Then liquefied it to form this man's cologne. The smell that overcame my interviewing partner and I was enough to render my anus shut in utter fear. He was asked kindly to leave. Interviews were done for the day. Story 9. Had a guy spend a whole hour talking about how his last job was out to get him, and the owner covered it up. And it was a large financial institution that he was a super high up in. And now they have blacklisted him, and he can't find work anywhere. And he can't get out of bed and do his normal routine until he smokes himself out. And he was too nervous for the interview, so he had to smoke in order to drive to the interview to calm his nerves. He asked how we thought he did, and I told him the second step was a substances test, so not so well. Story 10. I was a recruiter a few years ago. Never again. I was doing a pre-interview of sorts with a 45, 50 years old woman at my office for a position with a client, and she had a gap in her resume a couple years prior. I asked about it thinking she was either unemployed at the time or that maybe she was omitting something, not at all expecting her to be honest if the latter were true. But no, she exceeded expectations. Told me she used to work at the company I was interviewing her for, and that she was escorted out by security for punching one of her coworkers. So she thought it'd look bad to leave that on there, and preferred I'd leave it off upon submittal. I remember not knowing if I should laugh at her joke or end the interview, but when she never ed me, I wrapped things up real quick. She called me a week later, asking if there was any feedback and if the client would like to schedule a phone call. Story 11. I was really surprised when interviewing how many people didn't show up. The worst, though, was a guy who did show up, 2 hours late. Really expected me to interview him, too. I tried to ask why he was so late. Maybe he had a good reason. He worked late the night before Story 12, had a young woman interview to be a cashier. She was chewing gum, which was already not great to me. Not a game changer, but who doesn't know better these days? She then proceeded to give me her work history. She was currently working her first job of 3 weeks, but couldn't get good transportation to the town over. Before that, she volunteered someplace for a week before she quit because she couldn't get rides. She claimed this job was closer and that she could quit tomorrow and come here. Red flag for questionable dependability, but I could look past it since I'm a softie. But the final nail in the coffin was when I asked, "What is your weakness?" I always try to make it a joke about, "Oh, you always get this one in an interview," to kind of ease tension. This chick says, and I quote, "My weakness is customer service." Honey, you're interviewing for the customer service department. I have hired about 80% of people I interview. I just can't look past. My weakness is the only qualification I need to get this job. Story 13. Had a friend who interviewed someone for their residency at a hospital. A few minutes in, the applicant let out a super loud, long fart, but didn't say anything. He said him and the whole interview panel all just sat there awkwardly for a minute before a coworker asked another question, and they all basically just pretended it didn't happen. Story 14. I worked at a smaller law firm and was in charge of interviewing for staff. One gal said she hated lawyers. She was applying to work directly for lawyers. A poorly timed lawyer joke I could forgive and maybe appreciate, but if you are going to torpedo your chances that hard, I don't even know what to say, other than good luck elsewhere. Story 15. I was conducting a phone interview with a candidate applying for a role as a prison officer. Me. Tell me, Daniel, what made you decide to leave the Army? Him. I was dishonorably discharged. Me. Could you tell me more about that? Him. I was sent to Army prison. Now to explain, it takes a special type of person to be a prison officer. Tough, strong, and with a lot of situational awareness. It can actually benefit a candidate to have come from a tough background, and minor offenses might actually make someone more aware and capable in this type of job. Obviously, you need someone to be honest, but unlike many roles, a small criminal record is not a rule breaker in this case. Me. I understand. For this role, there may be types of offenses which are permissible. Would you be able to tell me the nature of the offense? Him. I can't. Me. If you don't disclose the offense to me, I can't put you forward. If you do, then I can note the offense and there's a chance you can still proceed in this role. Him. I can't tell you. Me. Are you sure? Him. I can't tell you. Okay, thanks for your time. At that point, I was curious as to what exactly happened in the Army, and the fact that he didn't tell me made me think it was serious, but I guess I'll never know. Lighter story. For manual jobs, we required all candidates to do the manual aptitude test. This means that they must demonstrate safe lifting techniques, basic awareness of safety codes, etc. During one mat, a candidate was instructed to lift an empty cardboard box, but pretend it was heavy. Bend at the knees, not at the back. He proceeded to moan and groan under the weight of the heavy box and heaved it up slowly. He got the job. Story 16. Interviewing for a technical contract role at a bank. The applicant had an IT degree and master's in finance, so looked pretty good on paper. Going through the interview, he was okay, nothing fantastic. But honestly, we weren't fussy, just needed a lot of seats filled quickly and would get rid of the incapables once they were on the job. At the end of the interview, did the usual, "Do you have any questions?" He did. He wanted to know why banks charge interest on loans, and seemed genuinely shocked that it was a source of revenue. Then, he also wanted to discuss bank fees and pulled out his personal bank statement. It seemed like he applied and attended the interview rather than call or go to a branch for his banking questions. Story 17. I was a supervisor at a cinema and had a hand in the recruitment process. It was a pretty chilled process, really. Group assessments with team activities and whatnot. You were only applying to sell popcorn and take crap from customers who can't read websites. So it was mostly your personality that we cared about. The GM basically trusted us to hire good staff because he knew we'd be working with them the most and wouldn't want to hire idiots. One guy during a written part of the assessment, few customer-based scenario questions, beckoned me over and asked if he could have a new pen because his wasn't working. He was holding the notepad upright so the ink wasn't flowing through the pen, so I had to tell him to put the paper on his lap. A minute or so later, he calls me over again. This time the pen is in pieces on the floor because he dropped it and then stood on it while attempting to pick it up. Look, you don't need to be a genius to work in a cinema, but if you can't use a biro without several issues arising, Story 18. I've got a good one. It's long, but bear with me. So a couple of years ago when I was managing a pub, I interviewed a lovely girl and it was all going great. Loads of experience, seemed smiley and chipper in general, just what we needed until we got to discussing shift patterns and hours requirements. This girl was a student, so she just wanted part-time hours. Great, she could fill in our busy periods at the weekends, I thought, but she actually wanted Monday to Wednesday shifts, preferably in the daytime. Giev. I closed my diary and said unless she can give us one weekend night and one weekend day shift, then we can't proceed as this is a city center pub, and those are our busy periods. Out of the blue, her personality completely changed and she flipped her lid at me, saying I was exploiting students and that a large part of going to uni was having a social life, which I wouldn't understand. She said that I was just another corrupt manager taking advantage of young people, and the reason I worked in a pub was because no one would hire me because I was too stupid and didn't have an education like her. Now I'm used to dealing with drunk, angry people, so a whiny 20-year-old wouldn't normally touch the sides, but she'd touched a nerve and I was fuming. I stood up and roared, "How dare you! I have a Russell Group education, which I notice you do not, and I choose to work here because I normally enjoy it. Now get the duck out." Off she went, tail between her legs. This wasn't the end of it though, oh no. A couple of weeks later, we'd had a really busy Saturday night, so I decided to take my guys out for a post-work pint. They'd worked hard, they deserved it. Who should be working in the bar we went to but weekday only girl on a Saturday night at 1:30 a.m. no less. She saw me and was clearly uncomfortable with my presence, but she avoided me, so all cool. A couple of rounds in though, I was at the bar, and I saw who girl turn to the manager, talking frantically and pointing in my direction. She was really worked up about something. It's a good time to point out that on our little strip of pubs, bars, and restaurants, and all the managers know each other, talk to each other, and are very supportive in general. It's a lovely community. So the manager finishes what he was doing and goes back of house with who. Not long after, she emerges in tears with her coat and bag in hand and is escorted off the bar. As she walks past me, she picks up a full pint and chucks it in my face and screams that I'm a ducking Karen. I'm stunned, but she leaves and I attempt to dry myself off. As I'm doing so, the manager explained to me that she had gone to him saying that she'd seen me selling substances in the toilets and that I'd threatened her with a beating if she told the doorman or manager, and that I should be removed and barred. He'd taken her off the bar, tore her a new one, and sacked her on the spot. Needless to say, we both spent the next couple of weeks making sure no one in the area hired this girl. Interestingly, 2 of those places had already trialed her and thought she was lovely like I did. What a psycho. Story 19. Once interviewed someone over Skype video call. First, they were 20 minutes late, and we had to have our office manager call them to remind them they had an interview. When she finally called, she sounded like she just woke up and she was sitting in a dark room with the blinds closed. Didn't show us any of her work, could barely answer our question. For all I know, we interviewed a vampire. Clarified that this was a video call. Story 20. I had an older man who was very well qualified for a position we were hiring for. Question why I, specifically someone as young as me, was in charge of a warehouse this big. He laughed in my face when I told him I had experience and the good word from an internship in college. He was also wearing a stained wife beater and a ripped hoodie. I would have happily given him the job if he could have kept his manners in check. Age discrimination is very real. Story 21. I do cast auditions for films sometimes, so I guess this counts. One time, this woman comes in for the role of a police officer. We advertise for around 30, 40-year-olds, but she turns out to be around 20. Oh well, let's try her out. We do a reading of her part of the script, and she seems to be handling it really well. Until we get to the subtle sex scene, she goes ballistic, accusing us of wanting to abuse her on set, about how directors are just using women to get their way. We eventually calm her down, and she leaves just cursing us out. We bring in the next female for the potential lead, and halfway through her reading, our secretary comes in saying the police are here. We go outside and the police are in the lobby because they got a call about me and the producer abusing the woman. She told them that we had actually performed it and never said that it was part of a script or anything. We film all our auditions so we can look at them over with the director later. So we have the entire thing on tape. We show it to the police and they just let us go, actually giving the woman a fine for wasting police resources or something. The best part about it? The sex scene had nothing to do with her character. Story 22. It was my manager doing the interviewing, but a guy comes in who is clearly not showered, wearing a dirty t-shirt, a clashing pair of pajama, lounge pants, ratty sneakers, and no socks. You could smell him walking by. This was a store where our dress code was dress pants and a shirt, black dress shoes, black socks. He went in the office and was back out in 2 minutes. Manager told me he only asked him, "Is this how you plan to appear if hired?" The guy reacted confused and he told him, "Never mind, thanks for coming in." On his way out, he asked if he had the job, to which the manager says, "I'll let you know." His application and resume were in the shredder before his ride backed out of the parking spot. Story 23. I interviewed a guy for a teaching position. Seemed like a good guy on paper. Said all the right things in the interview until he asked me my race. I'm light-skinned but Middle Eastern. His response? Summarizing from what I remember. "Oh, I love dating women from that region. They don't sleep around as much as American girls." I guess he thought he and I were on the same page. My response was, I was raised very liberal. The interview went downhill from there. Story 24. The applicant was rude and dismissive when I went to meet him in the lobby. I think he assumed I was the receptionist. He did not get the job. NB being rude to the receptionist is also not okay. Story 25. I was doing an initial contact before an interview with a kid who was looking to volunteer at a nonprofit I'm involved with. He mentioned that he was 14 and I informed him that we aren't able to accept volunteer applications from anyone under 16. He said, "Okay," and left it at that, until he started sending incredibly inane questions and seemed to have assumed he was accepted. For the last 3 months, he has been sending an average of 3 questions a week, despite repeated reminders that he's welcome to reapply when he turns 16. I suspect there's a screw loose somewhere. Story 26. Had a guy apply and came to the interview very nervous. We had to take an ex-girlfriend of his off the panel to avoid any conflict. Didn't interview well. Told him he never got the job mainly due to having to do a lot of talks, presentations, and his nervous demeanor led us to believe he would struggle. He then goes to a party at the weekend and tells everyone we never gave him the job because we had his ex interview him. 2 of my employees believe him who are at said party and come steaming in on Monday demanding I apologies. I am off that day, so they go above my head to a board member. A statement is written and it is sent around the rest of the board and all employees letting them know what happened. His ex and I returned to work the next day. 85 unread emails and I'm rushed into a meeting. Lots of ranting for 10 minutes and they demand an answer. I was removed from the panel for that person to avoid a conflict of interest. He wasn't chosen due to his poor interview. Cue everyone realizing he was talking crap. Story 27. I was part of team who does the interviews. Job is in creating marketing campaign. Girl comes in, chews gum, and basically says she is a ballet dancer and she wants to do this job until she finds a theater to play in. We don't give her the job, and she actually calls her dad, who comes in later, and goes straight to our boss's office. She got the job, but luckily not in my team. Story 28. So we were really short on help, and the office decided to take over the hiring process from the GM, me, and just start hiring anybody who applied online. Basically, their first day was their interview. This girl came in, didn't seem too bright, but hey, I needed help. We were short-staffed that morning, and I really didn't have any time to train her, so I did the best I could and just had her follow me around while I explained what I was doing. About an hour and a half into this, a group of men and women who looked to be in their late teens, same as the new hire, walked in. I went to the front counter and asked how I could help them, and they said that they needed to look at the menu, so I went back to making food. It quickly became apparent that they all knew this girl. They were looking at her, whispering and laughing together. I'm still just explaining to her what I'm doing when she wanders off towards the front. Figure, okay, whatever, some friends came to see her at her new job, I'll just let her get it over with and get back to training. Next thing I know, I hear some scuffling. Look up, and one of the girls that came in has this girl in a headlock. She took her to the ground, and by the time I got there, she'd lost her top somehow, tits swinging as wildly as her fists. I made an attempt to break it up, realized I would literally have to wrestle a topless teenage girl to do so, and called the cops. Story 29. This one is sad and uncomfortable. Not baiting anyone, just fair warning. I was a student in a program designed to help at-risk youths finish up their high school education while transitioning into college and earning credits. I was the student member of the interview panel. It's worth mentioning that the applicant was 17, me. So tell me what you're passionate about and how you think that will impact your choice of your major. Applicant: well, I've been in and out of rehab. I've gotten a lot of reading done there. It helps kill time because I don't really make friends. I mostly like to read about science. I particularly like biology, and I'm giving chemistry an honest shot. But I've been reading more fiction lately. I spent the last 2 years on substances. I don't know exactly what, but I'm thinking about going for a scientific career. Me. Cool. Hey, so we need to go over a couple things privately. Could you please wait in the hallway for a few minutes while we discuss, and we'll call you right back in? All right, man. We'll catch up with you in a bit and keep it moving from there. Before a second person got a question in, we were all dumbstruck. We knew we were going to be interviewing some hood rats and stoners and people who just had it rough growing up. But crap, I saved our asses because everyone just had their heads down in the table and were unable to make complete sentences. I just told the guy to go into the hallway so we could sort out our own issues. So after a few minutes, I called him back in, we let him keep talking, and approved his application out of concern for his well-being. Story 30. I used to work for a very large animation studio, and we would hire quite a few animators, illustrators, to train up to be animators. We would always get hundreds of applicants, and as I was one of the TDs, I would be roped in to do interviews. All I was interested in was seeing raw talent and motivation. We were hiring for a couple of junior positions, and so these qualities really were the most important, as most of the juniors' resumes are going to be pretty thin on experience. This one girl comes in, and she is currently working for a small animation studio that I used to work at, which was a nightmare environment, so she already had my sympathy and respect for lasting so long. So she had already pinned herself to the in tray a bit. She talked a really good game. She was young, but really motivated and had learned in some good colleges and had, as far as I could tell, done some of the crappier jobs in production, animation. At the end, I like to look through their folio and show reel to see what they have done. Again, I usually see a lot of college work or personal work, and some light corporate and promotion animation work, and get them to talk me through it. This girl opens the folio and talks through her strong college work. And then the next few pieces are my work that I had done at the company she is now at. I went very quiet, and my interview partner, another TD, was like, "What's up?" So I said, "I used to work, and this is my ducking work." She went bright red and then burst into tears. She hated the company, and apparently I was a bit of a legend after leaving. Did that happen? And she felt she was always working under my shadow, and all she ever worked on was crappy wire removal or mat cleanup. I gave her a long lecture about plagiarism and using someone else's work as your own. You know, even with all that, she did have talent, and I liked her route to where she was now. So we gave her a second chance. She got one of the spots. Still there, and we keep in touch. Story 31. I actually interviewed a friend once. It was a disaster. I was working in a customer service department and was the hiring manager. A good friend of mine was applying for a job as a telephone service rep. The position involved handling a lot of customer complaints. One of the interview questions was to describe his worst experience with a customer and then tell what action he took. He said he used to work in a department store. One day, a customer started giving him a really hard time about a return. The customer started yelling and would not let up. I asked my friend how he handled it, and he told the guy to duck off. My friend did not get the job. Story 32. Started asking a guy some questions about software he had listed on his resume. He fumbles 2 questions and then says, "I probably should remove that from my resume." Yeah, you should. Story 33. I suppose that would be me at 18 years old. While applying for some low-level office job to pay for college, I was asked, "Describe a weakness that you have." Being naive as I was then, I answered that I tend to procrastinate and have to force myself to begin important tasks. Once I start, it goes like a breeze. It was a perfectly honest answer, but I could immediately see the horror in the interviewer's eyes, and I knew that I wouldn't get the job. I also learned something important. Never tell the truth in job interviews where any blemish could be placed on your character. I have been lying successfully ever since. Story 34. I was divisional at an energy company. Division was about 100 staff. There was a round of interviews for engineer, project manager roles, really general roles, no real technical knowledge requirements, but you'd be dealing with engineers and construction people. I got called into the process by the director of that division just to make up the numbers. Policy was that there needed to be 1 HR and 2 directors per interview. So far, so massive waste of time. The construction director was throwing a bunch of nonsense questions at the candidates that they'd never have to actually deal with. Job was piss easy, no surprises in it. And I got all the soft, "Give me an example of a time when you demonstrated X" question. For context, I was approximately 30 at the time, and all the panel were much older than me, and I was being very low-key in the interviews, so as to allow the director they'd be working for to ask what he wanted. There was a dude in his mid to late 40s, and I gave him my leadership and problem-solving questions, which he answered like aye. Then I led into my standard, what if someone internally wasn't providing you with information or support you required to do your job? And he gave an incredibly answer about demanding it and standing at someone's desk until they provided it and not letting them leave until they gave it to him. The answer really annoyed me and visibly shocked the other two interviewers. So I said, and what if it was me who wasn't providing you with this resource that you needed? Which was half giving him a chance to pull back and half a trap. And he stood up so fast that his chair almost fell over, pointed his finger comms from my face and shouted, I'd explain to you how business works, you little crap. And then he stormed out, forgetting his jacket in the room. He never came back that day. So we sent the jacket to the recruitment agency he came from by courier. The next morning, I came in late and was told that he was escorted off the premises by our security guard because he had come in early and started shouting at the receptionist over his jacket. If he hadn't have come in the next day and revealed that he was mental, I'm sure there would have been blowback from my unprofessional interview style. As it was, I got away scot-free. Story 35. I ran a daycare. One woman came in with a shirt that said psych ward on it. Another brought her whole ducking family. Boyfriend, mother, and 2 kids. We have a play area outside of the office, and the other 2 adults disappeared while the kids were left playing on their own. She then wanted to leave the kids while she and the other adults went shopping since they need to get used to it here. Story 36. I was development lead recruiting for a small Eats startup. We were in need for a junior software dev, around 2 years of experience, nothing fancy. We were willing to train, just basic experience required. So this girl comes in. We didn't really want to call her for the interview as she'd had 6 jobs in the last 2 years, but hey, maybe she finds her true path with us. So what did you do in the first job? Oh, we were doing a project for a bank, then the project closed. Nice. What about the second? Well, we had a small project for a German company, but then they decided to forfeit it. Crap happens. What about the third? It was a predetermined length contract and they did not want to renew it. Oh, okay. What about the fourth one? It was a nice IT company, but I didn't get along with the colleagues. Yeah, sometimes you can't. What about the fifth one? It was a short-term project which didn't take off. Whoops, too bad. So what about the sixth? It was for a startup, but then the company got bankrupt. While thinking that bringing her in the company would carry the bad luck to us, she places her purse on the edge of the table. The purse turns around and drops the whole content on the floor. Trying to keep the purse from falling, she manages to spill the coffee over the table. So yeah, I tried to finish the interview as soon as possible, fearing that maybe she would cause some short circuit, demolish the production server, or somehow cause some flooding in the room. Anyway, fast forward 6 months, the company I was working in got bankrupt. Careful who you call for interview. Story 37. So hard to pick one. Maybe the internal candidate who showed up drunk? Maybe the person who asked me to remind him what job he was interviewing for? Or maybe the person who spent the entire 30 minutes of the phone pre-screened telling me how much he needs the job? Did not get to the first question. This is for a professional position at a large engineering company. Story 38. A female applying for a professional career position came to the interview in a Minnie Mouse outfit. When asked about it, she said she was going to a party after and was worried she wouldn't have time to change. We gave her plenty of time to change. Story 39. I'm currently working as a commercial recruiter outside of a medium-sized city. A quick rundown. Guy casually drops slurs and reason for previous termination. This was my second or third week on my own, and my jaw hit the table in shock. Another guy comes in absolutely reeking of substances. Are you comfortable with the substances test? Yeah, man, whatever you need. You are aware a positive result will mean we can't work with you. Oh, yeah, no, I just smoked. Another seemed relatively cool in the first interview. A little nervous, but that's not uncommon. Fast forward to the client interview and they found him pacing the parking lot after, shirt ripped off and talking to himself. We think he took something to take the edge off, but overdid it. I regularly have to Febreze, disinfect my office. Please shower before interviews. Also, my office doesn't have the best ventilation, so one heavy smoker and my office smells like fire hall ashtray for the day. I had a couple want to be interviewed as a pair. One was clearly on uppers and the other was coming down. They kept taking things off my desk and fiddling with them, standing up unprompted and occasionally yelling their answers. Story 40. Middle-aged professional woman who was a secretary at a large law firm. She was looking for part-time work in customer service. She was educated, had a great job history, and had a fantastic resume. If anything, she was overqualified. We were required to ask certain questions. In this case, I asked her, "Are there any people that you have trouble working with?" The correct answer is no. I get along with everyone. Her response, "Indians and Chinese people." I was baffled. 1, really? 2, our CEO was Indian and our HR was in China. 3, still really? Needless to say, I didn't hire her. Story 41. It was actually 2 applicants. I was interviewing for a graphic artist. The first applicant turned up, presented his portfolio, which was very good. Hours go by with 6 or so more applicants, and in walks a girl. She presents the very same portfolio, cover, engraving, everything. You would obviously think they would compare notes before doing this crap. Story 42. Interviewing for a customer service job. There was a group exercise where this particular candidate had come across as more dominant than a team player. The kind of dominance that makes you feel uncomfortable. So, not a great start. Another manager and I then sat down for the portion of the interview where it became clear that he had little patience with customers. For example, rather than trying to understand the customer's complaint, he'd rather tell them they're wrong. Following this would be a computer skills assessment, but we were only putting successful candidates through, and any who weren't successful were split from the group, advised of the result, and politely asked to leave. I actually thought this was an odd approach, but not my decision. Due to the interview proving that this guy was not the right person for the role, glances with the other manager confirmed she felt the same. We took him into a room to tell him he wouldn't be progressing to the next stage. Good luck in future applications, and please join the member of staff who will take him to the exit. That's when things went downhill. He demanded to know why we wouldn't give him the job there and then, with a raised voice and more threatening body language. It was just a call center job, so he could handle it. I explained that his performance in the group exercise and interview had highlighted that he didn't have skills and approach that we were looking for. We wanted people who would help customers, not someone who would argue with them. He accused us of lying to him and said we can't say no. We had to give him the job. He refused to leave until we said yes. At this point, my colleague went to get security, leaving me to repeatedly make it clear that he wasn't getting a job. When security came, the candidate was swearing, telling me I haven't got a clue, and I was pretty sure he was working himself up to a physical confrontation because he was stood up with the arms flailing wildly as he shouted at me. Security took him out of the room, and there were several escalators to get down to the exit. We heard the guy shouting and swearing all the way down. At the time, pretty unnerving, but it was a hot topic of conversation for a few days after that. Story 43 was conducting an interview session where the applicants were seated together in a waiting room, while I was doing a one-on-one in a smaller adjoining room. In walked this applicant who was in his mid-40s. He was dressed nerdish, a little bit like mama's boy, and a little overweight. He was overqualified, very confident, almost charismatic in his demeanor, and ticked all the right boxes, and even his salary demand was half of what others at his age would normally demand. I was impressed and thought that we picked a gem from the sea of candidates we had. The only thing troubling me was that when I asked him whether he had a driving license and his own mode of transport, he replied that his dad always sends him to and from work. And immediately I was like, what the heck? His dad must be 70 by now, and he drives his son to work? As far as I could see, B was nowhere near being disabled or special needs, and he had a master's degree, for goodness sake. So I had to ask him if he has any disability that rendered him unable to drive, and he replied he was perfectly healthy without any disabilities. Nevertheless, I ended up telling him that I would seriously consider his application and get back to him on my decision after a couple of days. Fast forward an hour later, just after the interview ended, an elderly couple requested to meet me at my office. When I asked them the reason they were here to see me, they replied by saying, "Oh, we just came to see the environment that our son will work in." It was the parents in their 70s of that guy who was in his 40s, checking out our office like it was the future kindergarten of their toddler. I mean, they inspected the desks, chairs, everything, even the pantry. They even engaged in small talk with my staff in order to inquire about the nature of my business and the working environment there. Eventually, I could no longer hold back by curiosity and asked them where their son was. Circumstances led me to assume that they most probably had to send him for the interview as well. Their reply was golden. "We drove him home, and he was raving about your company and wanting to work for you. We were so happy we came back to see with our own eyes what he was talking about." That guy, I considered to be simultaneously the best, overqualified, with below-average salary demand, and worst, need I say more, interview candidate that I have ever encountered. Story 44. Interviewed a candidate, or a C, for research and development hardware technician position, which requires an associate's in electronics. C was set to graduate in just a few weeks. Interview questions cover things like Ohm's law, resistor color codes, stuff he was taught over the last 2 years. We also gave an electronics test, which I would ask them about the questions they got wrong to see how their thought process and problem solving went. Testing and interview was on site at the technical school. Note, company I worked for had actual technicians and engineers interview. HR was only paperwork, so candidates were interviewing with people who know WTF they were doing. Me, looking at the test results. Okay, this is a question on Ohm's law. How did you get this answer? C, Oh, I can tell you how I got that answer. Great, how did you arrive at this number? C. Yeah, I can tell you that. Me. Fine, tell me. Yes, I can tell you. Me, trying to get some answer out of him. Did you use Ohm's law? Yeah, I used Ohm's law. Me. Okay, show me the math and how you used it. Yeah, I can show that if you want to see it. I got tired of this and told him that he didn't need to. We were done. Great part is, a few days later when I got back to work, I got a call from out recruiting team lead. He had someone calling him asking how to get around the system and get a job with the company. It was C, and he wanted to circumvent the hiring process and get a job with us. I told the team lead how bad he did and that we didn't want someone like that here. Next day, C calls me, how the F did he get my number, and is wanting me to get him a job here without having to go through our hiring process. I told him point blank that he was underqualified for the level of work we did. Furthermore, if someone asks him a straightforward electronics question, he needs to be able to answer the question, not say that he can. I added that I was the decision maker on this, and I had marked his application as not qualified. You are not getting any further interviewing or career opportunities with this company. Sure hope he figured things out. Story 45. In my old job at a cinema, management would let team members volunteer to help out with interviews. They were always group interviews of about 10 or so, and there was this one girl. I've never met anyone so stupid. She was late to the interview. During the icebreaker, she was staring into space, and when it was her turn, she was still staring and finally says, "Is it me?" after about 10 seconds. She couldn't even name her favorite movie. She failed all the maths questions, didn't put any effort into the group exercise, just all around didn't seem interested. But here's the kicker. Despite insisting she was no good for the job, she got hired anyway, and she was just as crap as I expected. Always late for work, lazy, always daydreaming, slow serving customers, slow cleaning up. And she still has a job about 2 years later. Once I was on a close with her, and even though we weren't especially busy, we got out 2 hours late because she kept stopping and I kept having to tell her what to do, and she would take forever to do it. Do a bad job and I'd have to do it for her or it wouldn't get done. I went to management the next day and told them never to put me on a close with her again. Story 46. Around a year ago, interviewing for an inbound contact center. At the end of a terrible 10-minute interview, supposed to be half an hour, I asked why they wanted to work with us. Well, I only live 2 streets over, so it's easy. Any questions for us? What is your disciplinary procedure? Last few places were so ducking strict, speechless. Story 47. I was working for a startup abroad, running their international operation. As the app and user base would be primarily in English, all the members of the global team were expected to know English. For our first 20 hires or so, I'd have a quick interview with the finalists. At this point, HR and other members of the team made it clear they want to hire this person. And this was more about the getting to know me and asking me questions. In essence, we were now recruiting them. Only 3 guys failed to receive an offer after this interview. The first was because it became obvious they lied on their resume. The second because he kept asking me if I liked the local girls and if I was another one of those foreign perverts here to steal the women. But that wasn't the worst. The third one kept over explaining things. I assumed he was just really thorough. He'd do things like mention Belgium and then pause and say, "It's a country in Europe, by the way." And I just kind of nodded my head in agreement. I would give these guys a lot of leeway, given they were interviewing in a foreign language. Then, when he mentioned Egypt, he paused and said, "It's in North Africa. You know where the pyramids are from. You know those big stone buildings." And as he was offering to draw a pyramid on the whiteboard, I interrupted him and said, "You don't need to explain this stuff from here on out. Just assume I understand the context of everything. If I don't, I'll ask a follow-up question." He took a long pause and finally said, "But you're an American. You people are all ignorant," as if to argue that I truly had no idea what Egypt was. He then said, "HR told me I'd be meeting with the head of the department. Where is he?" To which I simply stated, "That's me." He made a face and said, "That can't be right. There's no way they'd have an American run a department." I told him I didn't think the interview needed go on any further and to stay here while I got HR to walk him out. HR later told me he still messaged them about salary expectations and even offered to do them a solid by replacing me. Story 48. Interviewing for a physics lecturer in a further education college. The candidate apparently had a master's degree in physics and several years' experience teaching in a similar college. He was asked to prepare an introductory lesson on how ultrasound is used in medicine. He had about a week's notice to do this. Normally, we'd actually have a class of students he'd teach this to, but it was during the holidays, so no students were in, so he'd been told who would just show us the lesson plan and resources and talk through how he'd teach it. My fellow interviewer, please talk us through how you'd teach the lesson on ultrasound. Candidate, I'd tell the class that today we were learning about ultrasound, and then tell them to get their phones and look on the internet for what ultrasound is, and what is it used for? Me. And how long would you give them to do this? Candidate, the whole lesson. Me. And that's the only instruction you'd give them? Candidate. Yes, me. Are there any particular websites you'd suggest they should use? Candidate. Google me. Google? Candidate. Yes, they can Google it. You just go on Google and type in ultrasound and they can find the information that way. Fellow interviewer. How will you know if they've got all the information you're expecting them to find? Candidate. I'll tell them to make notes. Me. Okay, so how would you check their notes? Candidate. I'll ask them at the end what they found out. Me. What would you expect them to have found out? Candidate. About ultrasound. Is there anything specific about ultrasound they should have found out? Like the frequency range of ultrasound, for example. Candidate. Yes, the frequency of ultrasound. Fellow interviewer. What is the frequency range of ultrasound? Candidate. I don't know, fellow interviewers. So if you don't know, how will you know if they've got it right? Candidate. I'll Google it. Later on in the interview, he also stated that the nucleus of an atom contains electrons. I assumed this was a slip of the tongue and said, "You mean around the nucleus, not in the nucleus, yes?" He said, no, he definitely meant in the nucleus, and that the nucleus definitely contains electrons. Story 49. I'm a female engineering director and was interviewing a senior in college. He did okay in the interview. I was making small talk while walking him to our elevator, and I asked what classes he had left before he would graduate. He mentioned philosophy. I told him I had found my philosophy courses very challenging. He immediately retorted, "Well, that's because you don't have good logic skills." I dinged him in the review meeting, but was overruled by a VP and had to deal with him for 2 years. Story 50. I'm the manager for an escape room. He made it past the sit-down interview stage, mostly because we were desperate, and we moved him onto the training portion. However, if you can't do training well, we don't keep you on because you usually work unsupervised. So it's essentially an extended technical interview period. Dude's training went horribly. When you told him he made a mistake, he either looked confused and said he couldn't possibly have done it, or outright argued that he had done it correctly and that you were wrong. Sent him an email saying thank you, but he wasn't quite suited to the position and we wouldn't continue his training. He emailed back saying, "Thank you, but I am suited to the position and I know I'm a good employee, so I'll see you for training tomorrow at the scheduled time," to which we responded in no uncertain terms that he was not welcome back on the premises ever. We kept the office closed the next day, don't know if he showed up or not, but we thankfully haven't heard from him since. Story 51. I previously managed a bike rental company in San Francisco in a very touristy area. I held open interviews. Sometimes one person showed up, sometimes 5 or 6. It was never short of entertaining to conduct these interviews. I did require open availability for scheduling if hired, so that was one of my lead questions. Do you have any schedule restrictions? This job typically attracted people in their mid-20s due to the perception that you'd need to be a super fit, super hardcore cyclist. Nothing could be further from the truth. One day, a slightly older guy, my age, 45-ish at the time, shows up in khaki chinos and a striped button-down. I ask a couple of softball questions, followed by the question about schedule restrictions. This usually gets answered with, "I prefer such and such days off for the following reason." As long as they don't say they want an MF position, they're in. This guy says, "To be honest, I've been walking around, circling the block for a few hours, trying to get up the nerve to come in here. I don't have schedule restrictions exactly, but I was busted recently for selling methamphetamine to an undercover agent. I go to trial soon and am subject to random urinalysis. So at any time, I might need to leave work for this. Please, I need this job. I used to be a high school teacher that's now ducked forever. I ducked up and lost everything. Nobody will give me a job now. And I'm facing years in prison if convicted at my trial in a few months. I really need this chance, but I understand if you just show me the door like everyone else." Awkward. But I did give him a job. We owners, managers, wrote lawyers to judge, appeared on his behalf at sentencing. By that time, he'd been working for me several months. Got probation, no confinement. A few months later, get a call from his sister that he was busted on a piss test and headed to the slammer. Story 52. Witnessed the situation and shaky on details, but this girl comes in t-shirt, and if I remember correctly, yoga pants. And of course, she also was wearing Crocs. None of this was even a deal breaker until she dropped a name of a former co-worker of the same store who wasn't too popular. She publicly cheated on her BF with another employee, and he was known for his open relationship with his wife. Apparently, even though she knew he was married when she got into it, she was hurt by it later. She was essentially a drama magnet, and our manager wasn't about to hire another one. Story 53. Not me, but a very close friend, interviews a guy for an engineering management position. The applicant spoke in third person the entire interview. Bruce excels at, and Bruce has experience in, and Bruce thinks this position sounds promising. I'm making up these examples, but the dude was totally serious. Story 54. Guy with no manufacturing experience wanted to be a team leader. He had only driven a forklift for a number of years. He was loosely in charge of 5 guys. He had 0 regard for safety, was working on a management degree at a local tech school, but the only thing he really learned from it was aces in their places. He had no other experience to help him get the position. He was a nice enough guy, so we said he could work for us in the warehouse, but couldn't be a team leader without a lot more training. He declined, then applied for the team leader position 2 more times through temp agencies. We eventually told the temp agencies that we didn't even want him in the plant. Story 55. Me and a good friend of mine from college will often interview someone together as at the company we work at. I'm in charge of it, and he's in charge of productivity. The job itself was for an entry-level help desk position. The guy had a decent enough resume, went to a good school, had a portfolio, good employment history, etc. So we decided to bring him in. But before that, me and my friend are going over some last-minute ideas for questions to ask when my friend's secretary bursts in. She tells us that the guy sitting out in the lobby waiting for the interview was someone who was being kind of creepy and staring and smiling at her. And not the "hi, you look nice" smile. I'm talking "hey baby, DTF" smile. It was the guy we were going to interview, so I told her to let him in. And literally his first words out of his mouth are, "If you've got dimes like that all over this office, I don't know how I'm going to contain myself." We looked at each other with a "you thinking what I'm thinking" expression and made him leave the building. Story 56. This was in Argentina. So a Spanish-speaking country. I went to pick up a coworker to go to a conference a bit later, and his landlord has been pestering for him to interview his son, whom was a great programmer. We were always looking for developers, and I was wearing a suit that day, so my coworker asked me to interview the guy. I start by asking for his experience programming and asked for examples of software he has written. The guy tells me about how great he is working on all kinds of Windows systems. I look at my coworker and we start suspecting the guy has no idea what programming is. My coworker asked me to try to push the guy a bit, so I ask him for his experience with SQL. In Spanish, that is pronounced SQL, which can be interpreted as "that QL." The guy responds that he has a lot of experience working with SQL and also with other. At this point, my coworker and me start struggling with all of our energy to not start laying at the guy, who is very serious. Seeing that this is going nowhere, I just think I'll ask the guy a super vague question and call it a day. I ask him in which languages he can code. The guy pauses for a second and starts trying very hard to make a mental list. My coworker and I think, wow, this guy must know many languages maybe, but does not know what SQL is. After a few minutes, he says with full confidence, "To be honest, I prefer to code in Spanish, but if necessary, I can use a dictionary and code in English or any languages you may prefer." At this point, we can hold the giggles no more, so we rush the way out of the apartment and tell him we'll let him know. This has come to be known as the story of the Spanish programmer, amongst my friends. Story 57. Restaurant GM for years. Everyone got the same questions and it was scored. I gave the last questions and decided final yay or nay. This one young man came in and was a professional server. He worked around. The second to last question is a think on your feet question. Pretend I have Coke in front of me, sell me that Coke. Go, him. Well, first I would try to sell you a margarita instead, me. Regret thinking, but sell me powder. Him, okay, but I don't know why you wouldn't want me to sell you a more expensive margarita. Me. Again, I get your thinking, but sell me the Coke. Him. Aren't you a margarita place? It makes the most sense. Me. Next question after the last question, I did not hesitate to say, I will not be offering you a job today. He knew and quickly said, it was the substances question, huh? I replied yes. Arguing with the interviewer, even if it makes sense to you, isn't a good idea. A month later, I was in a local chain restaurant that shared a mini mall lot with other cookie-cutter restaurants. It was my day off enjoying a burger and a beer at the bar of Chili's. I knew the bartender and soon overheard a convo next to me. In the corner of my eye, I see it's a waiter from Olive Garden next door. Ryan, I will take a 20 Aozi beer and a double shot of Jack. BT says, getting off work? No, he says, I'm on break, working a double. Yes, I turned to look and see it was Margarita Boy, and it all made sense. Thankfully, I didn't hire a drunk. Story 58. Guy was applying for a mid-level web developer position. He had made it past the resume filters and a 5-minute initial phone screen with HR and an executive. Now we're inviting him out to lunch to get a sense of his skill level, which will probably be the final round of interviews. Turns out he has a couple of challenges. He has never owned a computer and doesn't know how to write programs, but he has completed an Intro to HTML course at community college and assures us he's a fast learner. Also, he's not sure whether we would want him to quit his other job. He's currently a full-time ice cream truck driver. Do we anticipate a conflict? If so, he's willing to give us the majority of his professional attention and also a limited amount of free ice cream. Oh, and one other thing. He lives in a different city, 200 miles away, and cannot relocate due to a custody agreement. But he can't be making that drive every day, so would it be all right if he moved in with one of us, me, the senior developer, or the 22-year-old junior designer girl, just during the week, obviously not on weekends? Story 59. I've had a couple of interesting ones. I'm not a recruiter, but I often do technical interviews for different software development positions due to my experience and the fact that I've managed teams before. One guy was literally doing the interview in his company office. Sometimes he would change rooms and talk quieter. Another guy was being interviewed, Skype interview, inside a car completely covered by that aluminum paper. Just like that guy in Better Call Saul TV series. Literally unbelievable. I've also had a guy being interviewed inside Starbucks, and I couldn't hear crap about what he was saying. Another situation was a guy that was so nervous that in 30 minutes of interview, he couldn't literally say anything technical. The guy mostly thanked us for the interview opportunity, but couldn't say anything else. He was technically bad, but besides that, he was really so nervous that he just couldn't talk. And no, he was not stuttering. I've interviewed a guy that made a really bad thing to a former company of mine, but he didn't remember me. I've never seen him before. But I knew it was him, and when we confronted him, he just almost gave up from the interview. And this one, which is a bit technical, but I've had a guy that told me that Jenkins was a language. He was talking about gherkin testing, but he thought it was Jenkin. Man, it was hard not to fall on the floor laughing. Story 60. Heard a story from my dad about how a guy came in for an interview. The interview went well. This guy seemed to have worked at some reputable companies in the surrounding area and in the field. Hold on. My dad notices that this guy has a recent reference from a company he recognizes. He recognizes it because it belongs to the holding company my dad works for. Problem though, that reference is bullcrap because the company has only existed on paper online for like 5 years or so. The reference has to be fake. Interview ends pretty much there and the guy is not happy and makes a scene, throws a tantrum in front of the secretary really, leaves angry. My dad is curious so he phones around. The guy would generally interview at places, make small talk with all the staff, be engaged, etc. If he was not hired, he'd simply put down the company he'd interviewed at on his resume and bolster this with a couple of the names he had learned by making small talk. If he was hired, he'd simply coast for a couple of months, not really do any work, make excuses, and then be let go after the end of his probation period. That means that this ducker faked his way into high-paying manager-level positions, took in the benefits for a few months, and then had to do that all over again. It's like never paying rent, trashing the apartment, and then moving out when the bills start piling up, just to do it to the next guy. That's called a rent nomad. But this guy was something else. He was a pay and benefits nomad. Story 61. I used to manage a GameStop. I once had an applicant show up wearing a metal headband with matching fingerless gloves, Naruto, a Superman t-shirt, and a pair of black Hot Topic pants that were more chain than pants. When asked about the spiked gauntlets he was sporting, I was informed that they kept the substances dealers away. I think that was the only answer he had put any thought into for that entire interview. His mother also called me a few days later to follow up. I wish I was joking. Story 62. Interviewing for a technical position, the candidate looked great on paper, but in person, he was just strange. For about a third of the questions, which were technical, not personal, he'd answer something like, I don't think I'm going to answer that. Not like he didn't know and was panicking. He was sitting back looking relaxed and rather superior, in fact. Almost like it was beneath him to tell us what he knew. Story 63. Not really an interview, but sort of. I'm a teacher. I often host student teachers, so it's sort of an elongated interview. I had one come in who had never been to public school. She had been homeschooled. I work for a sort of rough school, and when she came in, she was obviously very out of place and didn't know how to talk to the students at all. She would fall right into traps, dirty jokes, etc., and seemed totally oblivious that the students were laughing at her. My job is to observe how she handles a class. What's worse is that her mom would wait for her in the parking lot every single day. If she knew she was going to be late leaving, a teacher can never leave at the same time every day, she would have to go out and ask permission to attend a staff meeting or a meeting with a parent. It finally came to a head when her mother insisted on sitting in on some meetings and showed up to her daughter's class to yell at the students, for being rude to her daughter. It was a crap show. I had to sit with her and her mom and tell her that I was not going to be passing her student teaching and why. That went over like a ton of bricks. Story 64. Not the interviewer, but when I was a corrections officer, I saw a guy go in for an interview for co at the beginning of my shift. At the end of my shift, I was walking out and the same guy was in the booking cell now. Turns out he had active offender. Story 65. I'm not HR, but I do interviews for whoever is going to be in my team. Guy 1 told us he doesn't believe in social media and doesn't think it is an effective communication tool. Yeah, but he applied for a social media role. Girl 2, profile looks great. Ivy League graduate, MBA from Harvard, etc. She would say things like, I graduated from Harvard, I shouldn't be doing this role or that role. It is very arrogant, but whatever. Then she emailed us to ask how she did in the interview and wrote that she didn't do so well in the interview because she forgot what role she applied for. Not so bad in the whole scheme of things, but you would imagine a person who graduated from 2 Ivy Leagues to not be so dumb. Story 66. I was interviewing a guy to join my team as a technical recruitment consultant and noticed he had an address in a pretty rough area of the UK, no real work experience, yet parked up in a brand new Range Rover Sport. Asked some competency questions and he seemed amazing. Really good communication skills, a good grasp of sales techniques, etc. Exactly what I look for in a trainee. Then asked him a few times how he supported himself without a job, about his home life parents, and how he could afford an $80,000 car. And he kept giving really vague answers and massive pauses before his answers, like he was making them up. I'm getting more and more nervous, thinking I'm making a situation really uncomfortable by keeping on asking questions as I didn't believe him. I was new to interviewing people, so was nervous to begin with, until he eventually gave up and said, "Look, mate, I'll square with you." Turns out he's the son of one of the most notorious and violent substances dealing gangs in Manchester, but wanted to get out and make a real career for himself. To be honest, he was a really nice guy, and little me wanted to hire the guy and give him a shot, but the criminal record, fake name on the application, etc., meant my boss was having none of it. Story 67. When asked something like, "Tell us of an example of great responsibility a manager gave to you and how you handled it," the response was, "They put me in charge of the cash register, and even though I had to fight the temptation every day, I never stole anything from it." A different applicant passed the interview, but failed her substances test after testing positive for this. Her excuse was, "I wasn't doing substances, I was just hanging out with a bunch of people who were." Story 68. CV looked pretty decent for someone applying for a senior software engineer role. Showed years of experience in all the various bits of technology we used. 1 or 2 spelling errors, but nothing that stood out as alarms. Candidate shows up 30 minutes late to the interview. I'll let this slide, we give a bit of allowance lest things overrun. Could not really communicate in English. When asked about his experience using a specific tool, said he had never heard of it before. And when asked why it appears on his CV, replied, "The recruiter told me to put it there." Turns out the recruiter had basically edited the candidate's CV almost entirely. What was scheduled to be a 90-minute interview lasted 10. The recruiter got a blocking too. Story 69. I interview for entry-level positions at a factory. The pay is pretty decent though, $16 an hour for the first year, $18 an hour after that. Union, so there are annual increases that everyone gets. A surprising number of people tell me they left their last job because their boss didn't like them, which means I probably won't either, but one stood out. He told me that his last boss and he hadn't gotten along, and the boss had moved his shift. Not a great sign, but I asked why they hadn't gotten along. He told me his boss had caught him stealing. I asked to clarify if his boss thought he was stealing or if he was actually stealing, and he said yes, he had been stealing, but that was only because they had cut his hours. Did not hire. The other standout was a guy who came in with a ton of ink, including on his neck, and piercings. It's a factory, so I figured whatever and interviewed him, and he actually did great. I was ready to extend an offer to hire him and walked him to the front door, which was next to an office that was occupied by a pretty attractive employee. "Man, your secretary has a great ass. That's actually our manager." "All right, bye." Did not hire. Story 70. Had a guy come in for an interview. He was okay. Had good experience. We started talking about his previous employment, and he said something like, "Yeah, it was a good place to work." But towards the end, they started asking us to part of the job he didn't like. Eventually, one day, they asked me to do it. I grabbed the manager by the throat and held him up against a wall, and he never asked me do it again, and then laughed like it was a funny anecdote. "So basically, you'll threaten me if I ask you to do something you don't like?" He started stammering and saying how it wasn't like that, how it was ridiculous that he'd been asked to perform a task he was being paid to do. I just said, "Did you think that was a good story to tell during a job interview with a potential new boss?" And he just had more excuses and got slightly irate. Didn't hire him. How dumb do you have to be to brag about threatening your previous boss in an interview? Story 71. I was interviewing applicants for a summer camp position, working with children and youth. We asked a young man a scenario question along the lines of, at an event with the youth, a teenager that you've come to know approaches you and says they need to talk to you. They want to know if you will keep a secret for them. What do you do? The applicant answers, "I would definitely keep their secret 100%. He was so proud of that answer, clearly thinking that he'd nailed it. He did not. If you've ever worked with youth and children, you likely know that you should never promise to keep a secret for them because you have to report some things, by law, abuse, and the like. Overall, he wasn't a terrible applicant. I just got a kick out of him so confidently giving a completely wrong answer to a question I didn't really think there was a wrong answer to. Story 72. I interviewed a woman for an administration role for the local police department. She was over an hour late and reeked of alcohol. She seemed disinterested and confused throughout the interview, but the real kicker was when we got to one of the final questions. We asked her to tell us about a time she'd made a mistake and what she'd learned from it. Her response was, "I never make mistakes. I'm just that perfect. We pressed her to think on it for a moment, hoping maybe being late to her interview was a readily available example, but she insisted that she was too good to have ever made a single mistake. She then proceeded to send a follow-up email complaining about how we'd told her the wrong interview time, and it wasn't fair that we said she was late. She'd been given written confirmation of the correct time a week prior. Story 73. I interview a lot of people for mid to senior level software consulting roles. Keep in mind that if hired, the candidate would work 50% of the time at a client's office and would be the face of our company. We have a policy that the early technical interviews can be telephonic, but if she clears that the interview with me would be in person or using video conferencing. There were some technical issues with our video conference software when interviewing one candidate, but I decided to go ahead and spoke to him over the phone, and he seemed really good. The final round with the head of our business vertical would normally be telephonic, but since I didn't get a chance to see him, my manager elected for a video conference over Skype instead. This candidate decided it was appropriate to attend the interview with a VP for a client-facing role for a position paying more than $100,000 wearing a wife beater and boxer shorts. He didn't get the job. Story 74. I was reviewing resumes for programmers in order to set up interviews, and one guy sent in a video resume. It was literally just a Word doc with the word link, followed by a public YouTube video resume the guy, who was plenty qualified for the job based on job experience in school, made. In the video, he walks around his garden and talks about his plants. Fine, nothing wrong with hobbies. The next few scenes are from his living room, and there is just dirty laundry everywhere behind him, like piles of it along with dishes and food wrappers. Uniqueness of the video resume aside, it was just very obvious he filmed everything on the first take and made no effort to make the video good. Going through it, applicants can be a weird experience. Story 75. Recent round of applicants to work at the police depot here, dispatchers. If you smoked weed, no big deal, as long as it's not currently in your system, and it won't be while you're employed here. However, we have people who have done some hard substances quite recently trying to apply. Like in the last 6 months, multiple admitted to having done substances, everything under the sun. We had one trying to work for us from another agency. She openly admitted to doing black tar substances while employed for the police depot. She thought her honesty would give her a pass. We also have folks with multiple felonies under their belt, including one who was actively wanted. He got arrested while sitting with the others. We have so few people applying that if you pass the written practical test, you automatically get an interview, regardless of your chances of actually getting the job. We get less than 50 applications a year, 20-30 pass the tests. Less than 10 of those have a clean record. And of that, between 1-2 stay and finish the training, 12-month process. Story 76. I was a manager at a retail store, hiring for seasonal. We would do those behavioral interviews. Tell me about a time when you used teamwork to accomplish a goal, etc. Had a guy sit for an interview, and every example he gave me was something he had done within World of Warcraft. Story 77. Government co-op interview. Ask the potential employee a standard ethics question. You are organizing a conference, and you need to pick a hotel to hold it. Hotel A, $100 hotel B, $150, and Hotel C, $70. Hotel B informs you that they can provide you with a 7 BA credit if you choose them. What one does you choose, and why? The answer is look at Hotel A and Hotel C and provide this information to your supervisor, as they are a student and can't make a money-related decision. You then also inform the supervisor of the actions of Hotel B and ask if they are still to be included. Shows you can think and know when to ask questions. Girl looks us without missing a beat and goes, Hotel B and I would enjoy the spa later that day. Same candidate also told us she wanted to work for the government, as we have lots of cool secrets. She did not get hired. Story 78. Not me, but the place my mother worked at had an applicant looking to be a medical assistant. She couldn't read, didn't graduate high school, and when asked how old she was, she replied, well, I was born in 1950, so I'm 50 years old, or something along those lines. She didn't know how to take blood pressure or do literally anything medical, but said she'd always dreamed of getting the job and prayed to God for it. She got the job. Story 79. Radio advertising sales position. Guy walks in off the street wearing shorts and a t-shirt, cigarette tucked in his ear. Asks to apply interview. Not a real interview though, so I'll go to the next one. Kid was 20, had his parents with him. That would be okay if they just gave him a ride or something. Except they came in with him. I had to ask them to wait while I interviewed him alone. At one point he cried a little. This was for an on-air position, but it was low profile. I actually needed someone bad enough to hire him anyway. He ended up doing the job well enough, but overall lots of drama and crying. Story 80. About 4 years ago, I was working as a circulation manager at a small town library. The board had recently hired an assistant director. She was young, had the degree, but no real-world library experience. She introduced me to the worst possible applicant for the job. I was in need of a part-time circulation clerk, and the genius asset director recommended a girl she knew, but she had a little problem. The girl's mom called me to ask some questions about the job and revealed the little problem. The girl had selective mutism, and the asset honestly thought that girl would be great on the front desk. Circulation clerks work directly with the public, answering the phone, checking books out to library patrons, issuing library cards to patrons. There was no possible way I could have hired someone with selective mutism to work that job. I've since moved on, but sincerely hope that the asset director has figured her crap out. Story 81. I inducted the temporary workers in the pharmaceutical factory I worked in. Guy walks in, first question. You don't have too many foreigners working here, do you? Story 82. I can tell you what one young woman did when I was a hiring manager. She had a perfectly positive phone interview for a business casual, sit-down sales type job with our nonprofit. So we scheduled a time for her to come in. I arrive in the lobby to find this young woman wearing a stained, oversized wife-beater t-shirt, a pair of yoga pants, and what I can best describe as an Arizona iced tea can fake desert Native American pattern, and Crocs. And literally the first words that came out of her mouth were, I bet I don't look anything like I sound on the phone, do I? I was so stunned, I just took her in for her interview with me and my boss. The interview lasted all of 5 minutes, during which she displayed all the personality of a grilled cheese sandwich missing the cheese. She was not hired. Story 83. Once had a born and bred lady from Boston, she mentioned it many times, apply to be my receptionist. I have a casual style of interviewing, and will often let people speak until it is clear they are finished and sometimes even leave a gap of silence. This is usually the critical moment when they let something off script slip, as was the case with this interview. The question started with what hobbies and interests she had outside of work, and about 3 minutes later, she was telling us about skimming at the bar she used to work at and how her rent money used to go up her nose most months. She later went on to describe how some interviewers were pussies for not calling back applicants and telling them if they didn't get the job. The silence after that one was less intentional and more just stunned. Story 84. I once had a girl interview for a retail apparel job. During the interview, I asked why she left her first job, and she confidently told me she was fired for stealing. Job before that, you guessed it, fired for stealing. End of interview. Story 85. I was interviewing for a secretary, with emphasis on reading phone scripts and word processing. The applicant asked me to read her application to her. Story 86. In 2010, the dude who had everything on his resume from 1981 forward and could not edit himself down to answers that were shorter than 10 minutes long. So already it's not going well. Then we asked him about his customer service record, and he started giving an answer about working in admissions at a community college and how he had to give tours to a lot of first-time college students. I'm thinking, okay, good answer. Then he said, and you know how those Hispanics are? They bring mom and dad and grandma with them everywhere they go, so I gave tours to the whole family. I froze, looked over at my 2 Hispanic female coworkers who were in the interview with me, and they were just nodding and smiling tightly. We wrote down the direct quote on the interview notes so we could fully document why he wasn't hireable. Story 87. To the guy working at American TV and Appliance in Appleton, on August 9th, 1990, I think I may have been your worst. I was 21 and my mother had passed away 2 days previously, quite unexpectedly. I have no idea WTF I was doing going in for a job interview that day. I remember I did not stop crying for 1 minute, and the look on your poor, awkward, lower management face still haunts me to this day. I am truly sorry. Story 88. I was part of a small group interviewing candidates for a secretary, admin, office manager position. Our group included the husband, wife co-owners of the company, as well as the CEO or office manager. One lady's first words were something about how she wouldn't dress all escorty like the girl we had at the front desk today. This girl was one of the owner's daughters, was a fitness instructor downstairs, so was wearing workout gear and was just handling the front desk as a favor that morning. This same lady had a big gap on her resume with no explanation. We asked about it and she proceeds to explain she was in prison for embezzling, stealing from her former employer for whom she had worked in the same role we were hiring for. Next, Story 89. I used to be a freelance website designer and was casually looking for some help on some projects so I could take on more business. One guy sent me a link to his portfolio page where he platinized my mission statement verbatim and featured some of my work as his own. I confronted him on it. At first he said I couldn't prove anything, but once I told him that I could, he said it wasn't him who made the page. It was his assistant. Yeah, sure. I lost my passion for design as a result of this experience and the multiple choosing beggars and people ghosting on payments. Story 90. Interviewed a candidate once and took him out to lunch during the process. He ordered wing. He got wing sauce all over his face and his shirt and was dropping napkins trying to clean it up. Came back for the remainder of the interviews, still covered in sauce. It was very distracting. Note to all, for your next interview or professional meal, order something tidy like a salad or something easy to eat and not so messy. The guy didn't get the job, but this isn't why. It did contribute to my opinion of him and his lack of professionalism. Story 91. Interviewing a guy for a night security role, and halfway through the interview, pulls out some paperwork from his bag as examples of documentation he has done. Basically, a load of exfiltrated network diagrams replete with internal, external IP addresses and hostname. Told him to put those away and ended the interview. Story 92. Interviewing new graduates for a big oil company. This kid's arrogance was amazing and matched his 93%. Told us if we hired him, the company's stock would go way up. Our HR lady didn't like our roars of laughter at him as he left. Story 93. We don't usually have interns during the summer, but I got an email from a student at Brown, across the country from us, who was going to be home for the summer and was interested in interning for us. I figured I'd give her a shot, so I interviewed her on the phone and it seemed to be going great. At the end, I asked if she had any question. She then mentioned that she'd be spending 6 weeks of the summer in Mongolia. And did I think that would be a problem for the internship? Story 94. I wasn't conducting the interview, but I witnessed a dude show up either 30 minutes late with no phone call or 23 and a half hours early. His interview was scheduled initially for 2 p.m. on Wednesday, but he had asked that it be delayed until Thursday. He proceeded to show up quite unexpectedly at 2:30 p.m. Wednesday. He then chose to talk about how his friend, who we were in the process of firing for being a terrible employee, had told him what an easy gig being a delivery driver is. He did not get a call back. Story 95. I was recruiting engineers for a cruise ship and had one guy coming in for an interview that absolutely stunk of booze. When I questioned him about it, he said he had gone out the night before and had a few drinks. He either had been drinking right before the interview or gone out the night before the interview and drunk a crap load to still be smelling so strongly of it. I have a crap sense of smell too. Either way, he didn't get the job that he would have got otherwise. Story 96. Restaurant interview. Me and my assistant sit down with this one guy. Kinda seems off, but whatever, it's food. How would your friends describe you if we asked them? I don't have any. I don't trust other people. Okay, tell me about any other experience you have. I don't have any. My parents were supposed to bring me to work, but they are selfish and didn't want to take me, so I just never showed up. Will, duck dude. Give me something. Story 97. Guy walks in, doesn't speak, hands over his application form, sits down without asking permission, gets out a book and a Mars bar, and proceeds to act like he's doing me the favor of attending an interview and giving me time to read his application. I put his application down on the table and walked out of the room, leaving him there, and went and got security to escort him out. Story 98. I arrived on time to a job interview, and the manager yelled at the receptionist on the phone for 10 minutes before seeing me, starting 5 minutes after the scheduled interview time, ending 15 minutes after. Only then did the interview begin. This question is addressed to interviewers, not interviewees. But I was interviewing the employer at the same time they interviewed me, and they failed the interview. Story 99. The creationist who applied for the job at the Natural History Museum was also rather bad. Was trying to educate me during the interview about how he was going to fix everything around here because the so-called science was all wrong. I'm a ducking paleontologist. Don't go trying to tell me you know better because you watched some videos by Kent and Eric. Get out of my office. Story 100. After being asked a question that he didn't know the answer to, I had a guy yell, "These are the dumbest questions I've ever heard," and storm out. He then went outside and glared at the interview team through the window. Employers of Reddit, who was the worst job applicant you've ever seen? Story 1. For the last 3 places of employment, reason for leaving was listed as fire. Asked him, "What were you fired for?" He replies, No, fire. My ex-girlfriend came and burned the place down." Story 2. This kid came into the liquor store I work at, was kind of a get demanding a job application, so I just gave him one to chill him out. He decided he'd fill it out at our counter with our pen, then proceeded to ask what other liquor stores were around, so he could put them as a previous job. What? You want to lie on your application about working at another liquor store to my face? Idiot. Once he left, I immediately threw the application into the garbage. Oh, and he stole our pen. About a week later, he comes back in, said he just got fired from another store in our shopping plaza and asked if we'd hire him. I asked him why he got fired, and he said his boss was a banana for not letting him play Candy Crush on his phone while he was behind the counter and fired him on the spot. It was his first day there. How ducking stupid can you be? Story 3. Not an employer, but my friend told me one day that she didn't get the theater manager job she wanted in the local hospital. She has a degree in film studies. She applied for a job in an operating theater and didn't even question the application process. She just thought that the questions were purposely challenging. Story 4. Got a resume from a chicken debone, applying for a sales job, and has ever been a chicken debone. That's fine. Chickens need to be deboned, I guess. It was written in pencil on the back of bank stationery. His English was decent and dressed well, so we hired him. Story 5, first interview question. The candidate starts rambling about an argument that he had with his mother that morning. How she thinks that he's too quiet, but he's actually just thinking, and that he absolutely hates when someone interrupts his thinking, because then he has to start over again. This went on for 10 full minutes as he got progressively more and more upset, ending his rant with a loud slam of his hand on the table. Okay, moving on. We ask the next question, and he just sits there, staring at the wall. The other interviewer and I exchange desperate glances. After the longest minute I've ever experienced, I offer that we can come back to that question later. He lets out in a long, frustrated sigh and just glares at us. He did not get the job. Story 6. Worked in a grocery store chain back in the day. Started as a summer temp and eventually got hired out of high school and stayed on a few years. As a general rule, the daytime shifts were coveted and mostly given to more experienced employees, while a summer temp and one experienced employee would work afternoon, 4 p.m. out or 11:30 p.m. One morning, my boss and I were stocking fruit when a mother came in asking for a summer job for her son. No sign of the son himself. My boss told her that he could swing by himself with a resume for him and he'd look into it as we were looking for summer temps. She simply replied that she was all the resume he needed, as she had many years of experience as an employer and could guarantee that he would do a good job. At this point, my boss is sort of just dumbfounded, but then she keeps talking. She says that he cannot work evenings whatsoever, as he's far too busy with his friends, and that he would be working 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. at the very latest. He would also be unavailable for weekends and would take a 3-week summer holiday to go to Spain with the family. After this, she just asked my boss, "So, should he just be here Monday morning then?" I've never seen a man struggle so much with giving a professional no thanks. Story 7. At my old job, I very occasionally interviewed potential employees. Department store. This would have been circa 2008. One day, I go to meet a girl who had an interview, and as she's following me, I hear a distinctive flip sound. And I'm thinking to myself, oh no, this Karen did not wear flip-flops to a job interview. She did. She was maybe 18, very poorly dressed, had several facial piercings and tattoos on her hands and neck. She had only ever worked at Wendy's or something. Yeah, she could have been hired as a cashier, I guess, if we were desperate. The rules about facial piercings were iffy, but generally maybe one small piercing was acceptable, like a small nose ring. But we had so many applicants that why would I hire the girl who can't even bother to wear real shoes or take out her lip rings for a job interview? She also barely spoke the whole interview and struggled with basically every question. Her overall package was just presented so sloppily. After the interview, I, as politely as possible, offered her some advice about job interviews. I showed her I had a lot of tattoos also, but I covered them up for the most part, and in interviews I always wore long sleeves. I told her she might have more luck if she took her piercings out for interviews or put in those clear ones. The name for those is escaping me at the moment, because we live in a fairly conservative area. I showed her that I had several ear piercings that had actually got me turned down for a job before. Just ear piercings. Yes, I said something about the flip-flops. Overall, though, I just got the feeling she didn't even want the job. So, whatever. Thanks for wasting my time. Should note that the area has gotten a bit more progressive in the last decade, which is cool. Tattoos and piercings are way more acceptable in most workplaces now, and I think that's great. I work in an office and I have many visible tattoos and pink hair, and even our more conservative clients don't really say anything. I do work in a creative field, but we deal with a lot of very conservative and very wealthy business people. We are in the Bible Belt in the South, fairly close to Alabama, so there are still some pockets of really backwards-ass people, but it's not as much of an issue as it used to be. Oh, when I got hired at that department store, it was a group interview, and one of the girls was Asian, and her mother seriously complained at the front desk that it was taking too long, and someone had to come into the interview and tell the girl, "Your mom wants to leave now," and escort her out. She did not get hired. Story 8. I run a weld shop. Generally speaking, I don't give a crap about past history, tattoos, anything. As long as you're here on time, every day, and do a good job, you're golden. I'll look past a lot on a resume. One morning, I check my email and see a reply to a Craigslist job listing I had posted about a month prior. In the very first line, he says, "Do you substances test?" Okay, whatever. Most of my guys are on something. I reply back that no, it's not company policy, but I will random at my description. About an hour later, I get his resume. Dude had absolutely zero welding experience, which isn't necessarily a problem because some of my best guys have come in with no experience. But this particular resume, if you can even call it that, was one job: Taco Bell. After ignoring the resume, he just shows up like 2 days later, high as ducking crap on Probably Met. This dude was probably 35. He was here for his interview. I had to very kindly tell him to duck off. He started crying, like full-on anger weeping right in front of me, like I just hit his mother. We had to literally drag the dude out of the office. He wiped away his tears, got on his bicycle, and screamed a mouthful of profanities as he pedaled away. Story 9. She didn't understand we weren't going to hire her. I told her politely, because she was bad and we would never hire her anyway, that we didn't have work for her. She kept telling me when she could start and everything, and I kept saying, I can't hire you. There's literally no work for you here. Which got the reply, okay, I'll call you Monday to let you know my schedule. Story 10. I used to do text screens over the phone for a contracting firm. I had so many fake resumes come though, it wasn't funny. Sometimes I'd get the same resume or paragraphs from one and multiple other resumes. The record was 4 guys submitting almost identical resumes. I used to try to fool them into admitting it. I would ask, oh, your last gig was at company in some city. I worked there too. Which parking lot did you use? Instant panicked silence. Some of them would try to fudge it. They'd say, I don't remember. Then I'd say, where was it located? In front of the building. Out back? Was it in a garage or just an open lot? One guy was actually a genius. He said Lot A. It was still a cookie-cutter resume, so I said, I don't think there's a lot of there. He broke down and admitted he was lying. But I did give him credit for a damn good try before tossing his paper on the note pile. I had guys who gave perfect interviews, but then showed up as clueless, as if they'd never even seen the product they'd be working with. That went on for a while, until I started recognizing the voice of the one guy who did all of the interviewing. I've had interviews where I could literally hear the guy on the other end typing my questions into Google, then waiting for the results, and then reading verbatim what was on the web page that looked most promising. There was one time I actually Googled it at the same time, and then read aloud along with the guy and finished up the sentence. I could go on and on. The lengths these third-party contracting firms would go to just to get someone placed were astounding. Not a week went by where I didn't call up a colleague and say, you won't believe this. Story 11. I was a hiring sales manager at a home security company. This younger guy comes in who's very fidgety and nervous, won't look me in the eyes. I finally get to the point where I tell him about the FBI background check and ask if there's any reason he wouldn't be able to pass one. Yeah, he says, as quietly as possible, looking at the floor. I was convicted of assault 2 years ago. Okay, well, we literally go into people's homes to sell or install security systems, so that's gonna be a no for me, dog. Paraphrasing, obviously. Is there any way you can work with me on that? I really couldn't believe he had the balls to ask me that. Like no mother ducker, there's not a chance in hell that I'm gonna help a convicted offender bypass a background check so he can get into strangers' homes. 0 ducking percent. Story 12. I came in as an assistant manager after this fact, but my manager was telling me about the time a woman came in with her resume. It was pretty good. We tend to like people with no experience in the field, as it's one people tend to do a spot job instead of the thorough one we offer. And so we asked about her address, which wasn't listed. Can I put the forest? The forest? Yeah, I live in the woods outside of insert amusement park here and don't really have an address. We ran a background check and this lady has all sorts of felonies. Substances, abuse, you name it. She's done it. It's been mentioned a lot that we should be helping felons along, trying to get their life together. We do. We have a felon on our staff, and she's the hardest worker we've got. This woman in particular dashed off when it was apparent she wasn't trying to fix the problem that got her where she was in the first place. After that is when we discovered her history. Story 13. Our applications had the standard stuff to fill out, plus around 15 scenario questions. So the way I screen apps is to start from the back because I don't want to read the whole thing, and the most telling questions were the last few. The apps could be paper, then scanned in by HR, or on the computer. HR would also screen them for you, and they really crapped the bed on this one. We expected a few sentences or paragraphs. This guy literally wrote one-word answers to every question. Like one was, describe your experience in the following areas. It had 5 prompts, and he just wrote, good, and circled good, and the prompts. I kept going through it because the whole thing was so bad. In the reference section, he listed one person easily, my worst worker at the time. We didn't hire him, and we ended up firing his friend a few weeks later. Crafty thing was, we were going to fire him, and he called in sick the day we were going to do it because he fell off his roof. We ended up having to do it over the phone, and he starts to get irate, saying crap like we were only firing him because he got hurt. When it started to look like he wasn't going to work out, I started documenting stuff like not getting his work done or being late. HR normally would try to side with the employee as a form of due diligence. When I gave them all my justification paperwork, they were on board right away. It helped that the shift leads and my supervisor had noticed his poor performance, and so it didn't just look like I wanted him gone because I didn't like him or something. Story 14. This was 17 years ago, but when I was 21, I had second part-time job delivering pizzas for Papa John's. One day I was waiting for some deliveries when the store manager walked out of his office with a job application and taped it to the wall and said, "Anybody think we should hire this guy?" Back then in my state, a job application could ask if you were a convicted felon. A law has since passed making this illegal unless it is relevant for the job. On this guy's application, where it asks if you are a convicted felon, he answered yes. After that, it asks a follow-up question. If answering yes, please explain. This guy wrote sex stuff involving relative. He was not hired. Story 15. I have a couple asked a guy who was an EMT about working together as a team. Started great with him, talking about working with fire and police services. Then he ended his answer talking about abuse. Second one, had a young man want a job. Go through normal retail big box questions. Every answer had ridiculous amounts of "you know" in them. I finally stopped writing what he said and instead started doing tick marks every time he said one. On one answer alone, there were 37 "you knows." Also, every answer ended with "you know" and shrugging his shoulders. Story 16. I worked in recruiting, so I saw tons of resumes. It's tough when you don't really have any job experience, but I saw one resume where the guy just had name, contact info, education, none, work experience, picking up leaves for old people. That was literally his whole resume. 4 points, 12 PT font, covered an inch and a half of a sheet of paper. Story 17. 1. Brought her mom to the interview and kept looking at her for the answers. 2. Made a pleasure motion when asked about the shift hours. Also stated he knew we hired mostly retards and addict and didn't know why he needed to interview. 3. Suddenly remembered his kid's school called with an emergency when I presented him with the substances screen. After the ban time had passed and he re-interviewed, we were making small talk and he mentioned being glad he didn't have kids. 4. Left his girlfriend in the car. She kept coming in every 10 minutes. Are you ducking done yet? Story 18. As a recruiter, I've seen some pretty bad candidates. I did finance recruiting, so most were very serious in their job search, but I had one guy who had a stellar resume come in wearing cargo shorts and a t-shirt. We asked them to wear interview attire. He smacked his gum, used about half a bottle of the hand sanitizer in 15 minutes, rolled his eyes, answered his phone with an incoming call, and put on his sunglasses for the last half. I told him to call me when he's serious about finding a job. Not crazy, but I felt so disrespected, and it was like a 10-year-old in a 40-year-old body. Story 19. One stands out above the rest. I work at a small food mart. We were looking for a causal member, mainly on call, about a shift a week. We had a few applicants, but then this one comes in. She reeks of weed, dirty clothes. Looks like she also does Met. Hands me a resume. It's on loose leaf, crumpled up, and written in pen. Every other word is spelled wrong, and it clearly says she got fired from her job at Pizza Hut for smoking. Then, the next page there is a gigantic selfie, and in the background is a substance. Just a travesty. It's like she didn't even try. Then a few weeks later, she was busted for stealing by the new employee. Story 20. Not an employer, but my manager showed me a form filled by an applicant. Under the question, "Why should we hire you?" the person wrote, "I don't want to work, and my parents threatened to cancel my internet if I don't apply for jobs." Story 21. I work for a book publishing company. The worst applicant, for a guy who wanted us to publish his original comic, was a dude who wanted us to print his dirty comic. I forget what the rest of the comic was about, but I was stuck with this guy for 20 minutes as he enthused about his own artistic prowess. And I have very little to do with the industry, so I was just like, I do old comic book reprints, not this. Story 22. You've no idea the volume of applications that pour in. It's intimidating. The job of filing, tossing, replying, and interviewing, then trialing, are all on my head. It's no joke people say your CV gets a 30-second window or less to impress an employer. I've had the following. A girl spelt her own first ducking name wrong. She had a beautiful cover letter, signed, and her CV was okay. She misspelt her name at the top of her CV. Poor English. As in, I just ducked this into Google Translate and hoped it would be okay. Spelling mistakes. So many spelling mistakes. A girl who came in and simply said, "I'm Job, so many Miss Doubtfire jokes were had that day." I humored her by asking her questions that all got the same response. "I'm Job." The worst is when I turn down people who I deem unsuitable. I always give a reason, be it experience-related or I don't think they're a good fit. Some people don't take no and harass me in my decision-making. Like, "Yes, I'll hire your whiny, immature ass. Please continue to berate me." People are strange. Story 23. Two come to mind. She was just out of college and drunk off her ass. Sheer shirt, huge tits, no bra, and kept asking how she could get me to give her job. Keep in mind, I am the director of finance for a major insurance company. Next, the guy was so obnoxious. I ended the interview after 5 minutes, told him I didn't want to waste his time, and that there was no chance I was offering him a job. A month later, I see him in the cafeteria, eating with one of my cohorts. Another VP hired him. Story 24. I'm a food and beverage manager for a resort, and we are hiring supervisors for a couple of the venues right now. A friend of mine that I love was recently fired from the spa, where she was a stylist. She came into one of our bars and asked me to hire her as a supervisor, and told me that she was interested in the job because she needed a lot of money fast. and that the supervisor gig sounded like the quickest route to big bucks. She was literally sitting at the bar in a crop top with no resume and no qualification. I tried to explain to her as gently as I could that she just isn't qualified for the position. She argued with me and told me that I wasn't a good friend for not being willing to give her a chance. She still isn't speaking to me. Story 25. I'm a lawyer who does criminal defense, but is also well known for doing firearms law, which means I represent gun owners here in Canada where the government is trying to take their firearms license away or various other sorts of things. I got a resume from someone who wanted to article, sort of a law apprenticeship thing, with me. It highlighted a ton of work in anti-gun organizations. I wasn't looking for an articling student, but either they did not know who I was when they sent the resume, or they just completely failed to read the room. I was halfway tempted to give her an interview just for craps and giggles and to see how she reacted to the giant firearms photos on the wall, but decided against it. Story 26. I interviewed a guy for an engineering internship at an aerospace company. I could look past his nervous tics and odd mannerisms because I see a lot of autism spectrum in engineering, frankly, and I don't expect any real professional experience in a college student. So I was asking behavior-type questions to see if he could fit into the environment, if he had any problem-solving or conflict resolution skills, and I was fishing for leadership experience, for example, in scouting or extracurricular activities. This guy answered every single question with an example from being a dungeon master. It was ridiculous. Joke's on me, though. Fast forward 6 years and I work with a team of engineers who all play together. Guy would have been perfect. Oh well. Story 27. Not management. My dad was getting a pizza at Hungry Howie's. This guy comes in after my dad with his mother-in-law. He can't grasp the concept of a 2-topping pizza and trying to make it 3 toppings for the same price. Anyway, after a long bit of explaining math and specials and what toppings actually go on a pizza, the guy wants a job app. I gotta hand it to the guy working the register. The most patient man my dad ever saw, never got frustrated or anything, a true pro. Guy takes the job app and immediately comes back and asks if being a felon would keep him from getting a job there. Story 28. Applicant was going for an entry-level job. They told us they were an adjunct professor and would be getting a full-time job, so would probably leave after that. Ugh, I work in academia. I know the pain of being an adjunct, but you cost yourself the job. Worse, you lost to a younger, less experienced applicant because they didn't announce their intention to leave before getting the job. Story 29. As a teenager, I was applying to a ton of places to get a job and had like 20 plus applications in my car. Accidentally turned an application into the wrong place. They pointed it out immediately when I handed it in, and even though I apologized profusely and explained I was applying to multiple places for employment, I just knew that app went straight in the garbage. Story 30. I gave an interview to a guy I already wasn't too fond of for an entry-level position. It was a behavioral interview, and the question I had just asked was, tell me about a time you had a conflict with a coworker. What was the situation and how did you handle it? I can't remember what the situation was, but the coworker was his supervisor, and the solution was to get into a fistfight with him. I didn't hire him. Story 31. Had a guy show up with his tie tied around his neck, not under his shirt collar, around his neck, and his shirt was buttoned to the top, and he pulled the tie up and over the top button. It looked goofy as can be. At first, I thought he might be just trying too hard to stand out, but after speaking with him, he was a little off. Had another guy, the same week, show up with his tie tied inside out. I think he simply screwed up because he was super nervous, but otherwise normal. Story 32. My mom has a small store, and we try to hire neighborhood kids who want work to keep it in the family sort of speak. Most are great, but there was this one guy we hired who would come from time to time in a white t-shirt. He would say this is a new t-shirt, so didn't want to get it dirty. His job was cleaning the store. That was his only job, but he refused on new white t-shirt days. Had to let him go. He was outraged. Story 33. When I used to hire for the front of my dad's restaurant, I had a guy actually admit to me that the reason he was fired from his last job was because he got into a fight with a customer for disrespecting him. He made sure to let me know he made the punk cry. He also showed up in a t-shirt with skulls and smelled of needless to say, I actually told him never when he asked when he'd hear from me again, and it's the only time I'd ever done so when asked that question by applicants. Story 34. Used to work at a public high school. This guy applied online and answered selection criteria that would have taken at least an hour to write. Got an interview and did well enough that we considered hiring him as a teacher. When we asked for his teaching license, working with children check card, and his academic transcript, he just said he didn't have a printer, scanner, or whatever, and that he'd get them to us later. Fair enough, we'll wait. He insists we just let him start so he can get paid. We do a more thorough check. Turns out he never had any teaching qualifications and just thought we'd give him a chance to prove himself. Story 35. A 50-year-old former stay-at-home mom with no continuing education, work history, or volunteer experience submitted a handwritten resume for a full-time position that required a college degree. Not only did she not have the minimum education or experience for the position, but she also tried using her experience raising children to show that she was qualified to manage and supervise employees. Even though she was extremely unqualified for the position she was applying for, she would have been much better off not even submitting a handwritten resume and just completing one of our company's standard applications instead. This just made it glaringly obvious that she also lacked computer skills. Story 36. My friend and I were at our desks, worked with a friend once, heck yeah. This girl comes in for an interview, and it's the girl my friend had hooked up with a few nights beforehand. She deeply regretted hooking up with her because she was a mess for the interview. Still had makeup from the day before, we knew because she admitted it, and wore leopard print everything. She was terrible in the interview. She kept talking over the top of the interviewer and then would say, "Just kidding, I made that up." We still give my friend crap for this girl 2 years on. Story 37. I managed a houseware store, and some guy came in wanting to apply for a job opening I had. He listed his first name as Vamp on the application, and while interviewing him, I saw that he had vampire teeth in. Needless to say, that was a big no on hiring him. Story 38. My fiancé received an application that was under 10 words. It just had 2 previous jobs. Not companies, mind you, just something like box packer. Can't remember exactly. And a contact number. The best bit was that it didn't even have a name on it. Story 39. Not an employer, haha. But I do remember this one guy that came to my work to turn in an application. He had his resume attached. Kudos. But the last pages on his resume were written on notebook paper. I guess he wanted to make it seem like he had a lot of experience, but it looked unprofessional, as if he didn't care to properly type it out. So please type out your resume and keep it short and relative too. Story 40. We had a guy apply with no phone number. He also refused to give phone numbers for his former employers and references. No phone number for the employers is not a big deal. But combined with everything else, this tells me he would be a difficult person if hired. Story 41. Once saw a guy blatantly fake an accent. He asked me for directions upon entering the office in a British accent. Then, when I chatted with his interviewer afterwards, he said the guy had no British accent at all. Story 42. This is my favorite. Older guy pulls up to the store, parks like in a hole, wearing flip-flops with socks, sagging basketball shorts, a wife beater, neck tattoos, and a crooked flat-billed hat. Like Malibu's Most Wanted, the midlife crisis years. He comes up to me and goes, "Your lemma get a job," and I reply with, He then goes, "Oh, do y'all hire felons?" To which I respond with, "Yeah, I think so." "Do y'all substances test?" "Not generally." "Where a application at?" "Don't bother." Story 43. We had a software developer position open up and selected this one guy for an interview. When his appointment time rolls around, we go to get him from the lobby. Except it is not him. The guy who showed up explains that he is the candidate's agent. On the plus side, that was the fastest interview ever. Story 44. I used to be a technical lead at an offensive security lab. During one interview, this guy's resume said he found a serious vulnerability on Google.com. Obviously, that was the first thing I asked about, but he claimed he forgot the exact details of where he found the vulnerability. Pretty sure that's something you remember forever. Needless to say, the rest of his answers showed he had no idea what he was talking about, and was one of the few interviews I cut short. Story 45. You would be amazed how many people apply for medical jobs, e.g. training doctor jobs, without a medical degree. I also once put out an ad for a very specific type of psychologist, with very specific niche skills, in assessing a very specific neurodevelopmental disorder. Got one application telling me not to overlook the benefits of employing a dance therapist. Story 46. Had a guy send in a resume with his name, followed by AKA something, plus a link to his Ding Gig Facebook page. Lots of substances on that page. This was for an office job. Story 47. Scrolling through the applicant's experience. Suddenly, I see our company's name. We were a very small business with 12 employees. I went to find the guy who was previously in charge of hiring. "Oh yes, Susan. She was the worst employee we've ever had and was fired a couple of years ago. Why do you ask?" Story 48. I worked at a gas station. A very fat woman in a floral house dress and no shoes walked up to the counter and offered a canned ham in exchange for some gas. I obliged and paid a few dollars for her gas, in exchange for that ham, which I gave to my sister-in-law. It turned out it was a more expensive brand of canned ham, so I got a deal, I guess. She later came and asked if we were hiring. Story 49. His resume was in Comic Sans, so he lost me at that. But then he stated in his career objectives section that he didn't really want admin work, which was the advertised role, as he was hoping to be a model, but he needed the money until he got his big break. Oh, and he would need to regularly leave the office for photo shoots. In news that may or may not be a surprise, he was not offered the opportunity to interview for this role. Story 50. I had a girl who, during her interview, said that she identifies as a wolf and only wanted to be addressed by her wolf name. It was something weird, and I can't remember what it was. We didn't hire her. Her mother called and asked why.